Imagine, imagine a world
Hmm.
where, turning on your lights or accessing your bank account
Yeah.
or even calling for help
Right.
all of a sudden grinds to a halt.
Hmm.
Not because of, some natural disaster,
Right. Right.
but because a foreign power targeted a country's infrastructure
Hmm.
and just brought everyday life to a standstill.
Yeah.
This isn't some dystopian sci-fi flick.
Right.
This is like a scenario that's laid out in this book
Yeah.
that's been sending ripples
Hmm.
through military and strategic circles for decades. It's
Mm.
called Unrestricted Warfare.
Yes.
And
Published in 99.
yeah, 99. So buckle up because we're going deep
Deep dive.
into Unrestricted Warfare to uncover its key arguments and explore what they mean for us in a world grappling with new kinds of conflict every day.
Yeah. This book,
Ew.
it's a bold prediction of how warfare is changing in the 21st century.
Mm.
And let me tell you, it's even more relevant today than it was back then when it was first published.
So the core argument of Unrestricted Warfare
Right.
is that war is no longer just about
Yeah.
brute military force.
Right.
In an era of globalization and rapid technological advancements,
Mm-hmm.
the battle lines have blurred.
Global dudes.
And the weapons have taken on entirely new forms.
100%.
So less about tanks
Yes.
and trenches
Yeah.
and more about hacking into the power grid.
Precisely.
Canards.
Langs and Jiang Sui,
Yeah.
they argue that economic power, technology,
Hmm.
and the interconnectedness of the global system
Yeah.
have created entirely new ways to wage conflict,
Mm-hmm.
often without a
Well-
single shot being fired.
Right. They call this new kind of conflict unrestricted warfare.
Yes,
And they break it down into several categories of non-military warfare.
that's right.
And one that really stands out is financial warfare.
Yes,
Can you give us an example of how that might play out?
absolutely. So imagine a scenario where a hostile nation manipulates the stock market
Okay.
to devalue a rival's currency.
Right.
Think about the ripple effect.
Oh, yeah.
Savings are wiped out,
Mm-hmm.
businesses are collapsing,
Yeah.
and the entire country
Right.
is thrown into economic chaos,
Yeah.
all without a single soldier crossing a border.
That's terrifying.
It is.
That sends chills down my spine.
Yeah.
It makes you realize just how vulnerable we are in this
Mhm.
interconnected world.
Absolutely.
And they actually point to the 1997 Asian financial crisis
I do.
as a real-world example of
There's a real-world
of
example.
this kind of warfare.
They argue that while it wasn't necessarily a planned attack,
Right.
the crisis demonstrated just how rapidly financial manipulation
Mm-hmm.
could destabilize a nation.
And it's not just about manipulating markets.
Right.
They also talk about cyber warfare,
Cyber warfare, absolutely.
which, let's be honest, has
Yeah.
become even more significant
Significantly more significant.
since they wrote the book back in 99.
Absolutely, even back then.
Yeah.
Liang and Jiang Sui recognized the potential
Right.
for hackers to disrupt critical infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
power grids, communication systems,
Yeah.
financial institutions,
Right.
essentially holding a nation hostage
Mm-hmm.
from within its own digital borders.
It's almost as if they could see the future,
Yeah.
which I suppose is part of what good strategists do.
Well, they were certainly prescient
Yeah.
in many ways.
But what's fascinating is that they don't completely dismiss traditional military might.
Right.
They even acknowledge the dominance of U.S. military technology,
That's right.
particularly in light of the Gulf War.
Yes. They studied the Gulf War closely.
Right.
And they recognized
Effectiveness.
the effectiveness of U.S. military technology.
Mhm.
However,
Yeah.
they argue that it created a false sense of security,
Okay.
this belief that overwhelming technological superiority
Right.
was the answer to every conflict.
Yeah, like we can just technologically overwhelm everybody.
Right, exactly.
And it'll be fine.
And it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
It's not.
It's not.
Yeah.
They argued that this over-reliance on high-tech solutions
Okay.
and extravagant spending
Mm-hmm.
could actually make nations like the U.S. more vulnerable.
More vulnerable.
More vulnerable in the long run.
Interesting.
Because what happens when you face an adversary
Right.
who finds a way to exploit those weaknesses
Mm.
or who utilizes completely different tactics?
Which leads perfectly into their concept of asymmetrical warfare,
Yeah.
using unconventional tactics to level the playing field.
Absolutely. And what's really striking here
Yeah.
is that they were writing this before the rise of terrorism as we know it today,
Right.
but their insights on terrorism are still relevant.
Okay.
For Liang and Jiang Sui, terrorism exemplified how non-state actors,
Mm,
often with limited resources,
right.
could leverage fear and technology to achieve their aims.
Mm-hmm.
And they saw this trend, the increasing influence of non-state actors,
Right.
as a key feature of unrestricted warfare.
So it's not just about nation versus nation anymore. It's about all these different
Okay, different
actors
actors.
with different agendas
Mm-hmm.
using a whole new arsenal of weapons,
A whole new arsenal.
which makes their critique of traditional military thinking even more relevant.
100%.
Okay, so we've established that traditional military thinking might be a little outdated.
It's definitely due for an upgrade.
So what are Liang and Jing Sui proposing instead?
What's their solution?
Yeah, what's their solution for navigating this new age of unrestricted warfare?
Well, their answer is a framework they call Beyond Limits Combined War,
Okay.
which is about recognizing that the lines between war and peace,
Mm-hmm.
military and civilian,
Right.
even nation-state and non-state actors are blurring.
Beyond Limits Combined War.
It's a mouthful.
It sounds intense.
It does.
Break it down for us.
What makes this approach so different?
Yeah.
Well, it rests on three main pillars.
Okay.
First, they emphasize the idea of supranational combination.
Supranational.
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
So above nations.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's not just about forming alliances between countries anymore.
Right.
They argue that true power in the 21st century comes from a more complex web of actors.
Mm-hmm.
This could include international organizations like the UN
Right.
or NGOs.
All right.
It could involve private corporations with global reach.
Interesting.
And it could even mean collaborating with non-state groups to achieve specific objectives.
So the battle lines aren't just drawn on a map anymore.
Right.
It's about building coalitions that go beyond traditional borders.
Precisely. And that leads to the second pillar,
Okay.
transcending boundaries.
Oh, I like it.
Liang and Chang Sui argued that warfare now spans multiple domains:
Okay.
political, economic, cultural, and informational.
It's everything.
They say to be effective,
Yeah.
you need to be able to operate across all of these domains simultaneously.
So it's not enough to just have a strong military. Not enough anymore. You need to be playing the game on all these different boards at once.
We've got to be a multitasker.
Right.
Let's say a nation wants to destabilize a rival.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, they might have considered a military strike.
Right.
But in this new landscape, they might opt for a subtler approach.
Okay.
They could use economic leverage to pressure their rivals' allies,
Mm-hmm.
launch sophisticated disinformation campaigns to sow discord among the population,
Okay.
or even use cyber attacks to disrupt critical infrastructure,
Wow.
you see.
It's almost like a chess game, but with much higher stakes.
Yes.
Because it's happening across so many different levels.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks.
And that brings us to the third pillar,
Okay.
which is asymmetrical warfare.
Okay.
Now, this is a classic military strategy,
Right.
but they argue it becomes even more crucial
Okay.
in an era of unrestricted warfare.
Asymmetrical warfare.
Yes,
That's basically about exploiting your opponent's weaknesses, right?
that's it.
Using unconventional tactics to level the playing field,
Exactly.
like David versus Goliath.
Exactly like David versus Goliath.
Okay.
But they take it a step further.
How so?
They argue that to truly achieve your objectives in this new landscape,
Okay.
you have to be unpredictable,
Okay.
constantly adapting your tactics,
Great.
and always looking for ways to exploit your opponent's vulnerabilities,
Okay.
no matter how unconventional those methods might seem.
This is all starting to sound a bit like anything goes.
Yeah.
Which honestly makes me a bit uneasy.
Yeah, I can see why.
It seems like they're pushing some serious ethical boundaries here.
It's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that this book was written for a Chinese audience
Right.
within the context of China's strategic goals.
Right.
Liang and Shansui weren't writing a philosophical treatise on the ethics of war.
Oh.
They were analyzing how a nation,
Yeah.
particularly one facing a more powerful adversary, could effectively compete and protect its interests
Mm-hmm.
in this rapidly changing world.
So a lot unrestricted warfare is about finding ways to overcome a power disadvantage.
That's a good way to put it.
But why should we,
Yeah.
as listeners, care about this book?
Oh, yeah.
It was written over 2 decades ago for
Right.
a very specific audience.
For sure.
What's the relevance for us today?
That's a great question, and I think the relevance is
Yeah.
that the trends Liang and Shansui identified are even more pronounced today
Oh, wow.
than they were back in 1999.
Really?
Think about the rise of cyber attacks,
Hmm.
the spread of misinformation and propaganda online,
Right.
the growing influence of non-state actors
Right.
like terrorist groups or even hacktivist collectives.
Yeah.
We're basically living in the world they predicted,
It's true.
which is kind of unsettling when you think about it.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's what makes unrestricted warfare so important. It's
Uh,
a wake-up call. It's a reminder that the old rules of warfare no longer apply,
Right.
and that we need to fundamentally rethink how we approach conflict in the 21st century.
So how do we do that?
Right.
How do we defend ourselves in a world where anything goes?
That's the million-dollar question.
What does this mean
Yeah.
for how we think about national security or even how we live our lives?
The authors don't offer easy answers,
Okay.
but they do offer, I think, crucial insights.
Okay.
They emphasize the importance of knowledge,
Okay.
of understanding how our increasingly interconnected world works,
Right.
the flows of information, finance,
Yeah.
and technology that underpin global systems.
Right.
Because only by understanding how these systems work
Mm-hmm.
can we hope to protect them.
Okay, so this is about more than just military preparedness.
Right.
It's about a whole new mindset,
Yes.
a new way of looking at the world and recognizing these new types of threats that we face.
You got it.
So we need to think differently. It's not just about, building bigger bombs and better tanks.
It's not about outgunning anymore.
It's about understanding this interconnected web of systems
Yeah.
that make the world tick
It's much more complex.
and learning how to protect ourselves within that landscape.
Exactly. And that's where I think Liang and Zhang Sui's concept of beyond limits combined war becomes so crucial.
Okay.
It's not just a defensive strategy.
Right.
It's a framework for thinking about power and influence in the 21st century.
Okay.
It requires us to be adaptable,
Hmm.
to constantly reassess our assumptions,
Right.
and to be willing to use all the tools at our disposal,
Okay.
diplomatic, economic, informational,
So not just military.
and yes, military,
Okay.
to achieve our objectives.
It sounds like they're advocating for a much more nuanced
Much more nuanced.
and multifaceted approach to national security
100%.
than just focusing on military strength alone.
Absolutely. They argue that in an era of unrestricted warfare,
Yeah.
the most potent weapon is the ability to think beyond limits,
Okay.
to anticipate threats before they emerge, to adapt quickly to changing circumstances,
Right.
and to form strategic partnerships that enhance our resilience.
Those are all really good points.
It's about being agile, innovative,
Mm-hmm.
and always a step ahead.
Which leads to, one of their more kind of provocative statements, which
Yeah.
is that the first rule of unrestricted warfare is that there are no rules.
That's right.
It's kind of chilling to think about,
It's a chilling thought for sure.
but it also reflects the reality of the world that they're describing.
Yeah, and I think it's a stark reminder
Yeah.
that we're operating in a landscape where not all actors play by the same rules.
Right.
And while they don't advocate
Right.
for abandoning ethical considerations altogether,
Right.
they do urge their readers to recognize that what might be considered off limits
Yeah.
in a traditional conflict
Right.
might be fair game in this new era of unrestricted warfare.
So how do we navigate that? Right. How do we grapple with these moral complexities
Yeah.
of this new kind of warfare where the lines are blurred and the stakes are so high?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
And it's one that Liang and Sheng Sui don't shy away from.
Okay.
They emphasize that in this new era, victory requires more than just military might
Mm-hmm.
or technological superiority.
It's more than that.
It demands a deep understanding of the interconnected nature of global systems
Right.
and the ability to anticipate and adapt to the unexpected.
So it's a call to action
It is.
for strategists, policymakers,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd even say everyday citizens
Yeah.
to develop a new kind of strategic literacy.
Yes.
One that goes beyond traditional military doctrines.
Absolutely. Unrestricted Warfare isn't just a book for generals and politicians.
Right.
It's a book for anyone who wants to understand the forces shaping the 21st century.
I like that.
Because ultimately,
Yeah.
as Liang and Sheng Sui remind us, in this age of interconnectedness and blurred boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
we're all potential targets.
Yeah.
And we all have a role to play in shaping a future where conflict, however it may manifest,
Right doesn't lead to catastrophe.
Unrestricted Warfare
Mm-hmm.
is a book that really challenges us
It does.
to rethink our assumptions about war and peace,
Yeah.
to acknowledge the complex realities of the 21st century, and to equip ourselves with the knowledge and the critical thinking skills necessary to navigate this uncertain terrain.
It's a book that stays with you.
It does.
Long after you've finished reading it.
Yeah.
It prompts reflection, debate, and most importantly, a deeper understanding of the world we live in.
Well said.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.